Hello, hi everyone. Happy New Year. Excited to be here again today. Sage, my name as always. And today I have with me Chris. Chris,
Hi
do you want to
guys.
do a quick intro?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm just maintaining the Ark UI depot. And yeah, I'm happy to chat about Ark UI today. Will be lots of fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Maybe not just chat about Ark UI in general, but just like headless UI libraries. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I think one common question that I think I have, I mean, most people kind of think about is what is a headless UI library in the first place? Like, what is the benefit of a headless library? Why can't I just use anything like a styled library, I guess, and just go with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I kind of think I have to take a step back and look in the past where like Material UI, Checker UI in V2 and V1 and all the other good UI libraries out there, they normally come with like a full package. You have your components, mostly close up, and then some styling, whatever the UI maintainer preferred. And then you get that, and you have some small props you can tweak and some styling properties and theming options. But it kind of like always run into this issue of like basically having like a hard time later when you're actually starting to, well, maybe come up with your own design system or branding identity that's
Hmm.
quite off like what you used to use. And then I think that's why like those headless components library are kind of born. And yeah, so the idea basically is that instead of having any CSS or UI besides some functional styling, you basically just naked, or let's say accordion, and then you just
Yeah.
bring your own styling solution, whatever you prefer. And well, that's I think what kind of sums up a headless component library.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in essence, you're sort of like just having the raw skeleton of that component without any
Yes.
styles, and all the logic, I mean, in there. You just want to style it the way you want, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And then
exactly.
in your opinion, like, what do you think makes up a good headless library?
Well, a good headless library, in my opinion, is well, even though it's kind of cumbersome, you kind of have to get access to all the parts. So even if it's a very tiny node or a very tiny element of that thing, you still need to access it and kind of like, well, just like add some props there, add some styling, some class names, whatever it is. And so basically, it's kind of like that, and that's something we have to be very careful about because I mean, even in Ark UI, we had at the beginning just combining small things that should be together, but then turns out, well, no, it's better to keep them separated, and kind of gives you a very big component, a skeleton for let's say a slider with like a 7, 8, 9 parts, and that kind of like is a bit weird to look at when you start doing headless component libraries. But when you get used to it and kind of like, well, figure out how to work with it, it's actually pretty awesome because you can just close it up however you like it, however your design system is kind of like foreseeing that, how this should work. And you gives the user the control of like how open or closed the design system should be, depending on the philosophy that goes in your design system. And that thing is this most important part. And then as always, like consistency, right? You want to basically know your part names. You don't want to use different part names and different components. And this basically makes it very hard to learn. So you have to really pay attention as someone who creates a headless component library to kind of stick to a certain naming scheme so folks can understand like what's going on and what's that. And yeah. Mhm.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think I'll probably definitely add on to that the accessibility
Oh
part of
yeah.
that, where yeah, like you want to make sure that your the headless library like works pretty well with the keyboard, with the mouse, with screen reader. And I think the keyboard is a very tricky one as well because like it depends on how complex it gets. With the
Oh
mouse
yeah.
is like the easiest thing to work on or to design, but I think as you think about like other modalities, like the keyboard and the screen reader, it gets really, really hard. And I think this is where people can offload that to a library. I'm just gonna use a library and call it a day. But then what is sort of like the advantage of like having these multiple parts that you talk about versus just having a single component? So if I want a calendar or a date picker, I just want to import a date picker. I don't care about all the different parts, right? Like, are there like any downsides to this approach as an engineer? If I'm working on a project and I want to choose like the library, do I go for a fully styled library like a reactive picker or something like this, or do I go for a headless library like Ark UI date picker? Like what's your take on that?
No, that's a very good one. In my previous company, I kind of had to do like a cropper, like so you upload a picture and then you have to crop it to well, fit a certain shape. And surprisingly, there are not really good libraries out there that kind of like, well, met the requirements for that component. I found a single one with just a big black box component with a ton of properties on there, and it's hard for me to design it and style it the way the kind of designer foreseen that. And that was kind of a very bad experience. But since the lack of any alternatives, I kind of just fight my way through it, and that's that. And I think it always depends on the scope and how much time you have. And I think for a startup or any kind of quick weekend project, I don't think a headless component library is the way to go, as it kind of requires a lot of tinkering with the component and the parts. But let's say if you're a big company or just a small, medium company, doesn't matter, but you kind of want to have your own design system, I think a headless component library is a requirement, because it kind of allows you to just design and shape and form and color it according, for example, the way you want it. Another way kind of foreseen any kind of those closed up UI component libraries. And I think for me, the sweet spot of that is basically using a pre-made, opinionated UI component library, and then basically having later the option to, just eject and then just kind of grab the accordion and tweak it. But you can start off obviously with a pre-made solution that works fine. And I think that's what I see the future of UI component library in basically the front end in general, as I feel like this is basically the best spot. You can start off quick, just try your prototype, and then later, if you have a big company that's after your prototype, then you can start to eject and design and brand your identity in that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in essence, you're saying it makes sense to sort of start with a pre-made library, but always have the option to sort of opt back to the full-blown parts, and you can style them as you want. I think that definitely resonates with that. But yeah, if you're joining the stream, feel free to drop a comment. Would like to get to meet you. Just say hi in the comments. Just tell us your name, where you're joining from. It'd be nice to at least have a chat with you. And also, you can join in the conversation as well. It's a free conversation. Feel free to sort of opt in and share your thoughts about headless component libraries as well. So I think the other thing I'd love to learn about from you is if I've got a design system to build and I want to pick a headless library, what are the criteria? What kind of things should I be looking out for to actually pick? Because we've got quite a few of them, especially in the React ecosystem. We've got Radix UI, we've got Ark UI, we've got React Spectrum, and quite a couple as well. I think in Vue we've got only a few options, and Solid maybe just I think Cobalt or something like this. And then maybe Solid UI. I think that. But what are the key things I should be looking out for if I want to build a design system and I need to pick a headless library?
Yeah, I think it'd be a very good spot right now, since a lot of options to pick from. So you're not just stick with one option. It's always good, right? I think the main criteria for me would basically just start off what kind of components I want to do, and is this component available in that headless component library, right? That's basically the first step to look out for, and so kind of looking for those. And then for me, it comes down to any kind of evaluation of any library, how is it maintained? Is it open source? Is it closed source? Is a company behind it? Is not a company behind it? What's the past? How many open issues they have? How many stars? How active are the maintainers? And that kind of stuff. And then I think so this basically goes for every kind of library you want to pick, especially in enterprise context where you have to write RFCs for certain labs, and then you have to get the approval from your team to pick that one. I think another criteria could be, and it's something very niche, but also very enterprisey, is let's say you have different teams. They, for a historical reason, use different JavaScript frameworks. Let's say Solid, Vue, Angular. I've been in that spot, so that's not uncommon. And then sometimes you plan to do your design system, and then you maybe want to do the same and not redo everything in different frameworks. And for example, web components or even Ark UI is a very good spot fit, because you can just do the same design system and then just have to apply the anatomy for different flavors of that. So it's very specific, and maybe for agencies or very big companies with historically different teams and tech stacks. But yeah, not my top three, what I will look out for. What about you? Any myths?
What would I look out for if I'm building a design system? I would say I mean, the first thing, of course, like you said, is just how maintained is this library? I mean, just look through the commit history, look through the contributors. I think one of the key things you look out for is like how many key maintainers do you actually have, right? So, I mean, the fewer the maintainers, the higher the risk of using that library, especially if they don't have any history. I mean, if you just check a repo and you see just one person, for example, for a long time, I mean, that probably tells you that, I mean, it doesn't mean it's a red flag, but it just means that, like, I mean, you have to kind of be cautious with that decision. And I think, of course, just the number of components the headless library offers you. So you can go through a list of components. I mean, one thing I see people do, of course, when they pick libraries, maybe go through the bundle size or just start to do the analysis. But hey, that's not a good practice. You actually have to use the components in a small application, build the application, check the bundle, and then you can have like a more realistic measure of sort of like bundle size. But I think also just doing a quick review of the API, the examples that this library actually gives you, because I mean, using the library is like learning a whole new system in that sense, right? So you want to see that, do I really understand the system? Do I get a sense of like, okay, this, if I need to pick a date picker, do they have a date picker in there? How does the date picker look like? I mean, what's the JSX structure of that date picker? What's the anatomy of that? Like, is this something that is very consistent? I think that's really where like you want to focus on. I think, of course, this day and age, examples and documentation is everything. So you want to check docs. I mean, have I got plenty docs, plenty examples to look at? That is one thing we try to focus on, especially on Ark UI. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true.
I think I'll pick that. And maybe one thing that comes to mind is, where does a framework, I think, I mean, when I'm trying to figure out a headless library to use, how important is it that this library, like, do I need to pick a React specific library, or like how important is the framework in this decision process? I think.
I think often like the JavaScript framework is kind of like determined by the company you work in, and there's
Yeah.
basically nothing you really can pick. But if you can pick, I mean, I have a favorite since I work with a lot of those frameworks, which is Solid.js. It's really good. Unfortunately, the ecosystem isn't that great, and well, that's also what comes down to. Like, you have to not just like what you personally prefer, which is
Yeah.
obviously differ than maybe what the company do, but you also have to keep in mind that you need experience in that framework, and you need to hire maybe folks that can use that. I mean, not that I think that when you can React, I think you can do Solid and vice versa. Maybe Svelte and Vue are a bit different as the way they work, and the learning curve is a bit different, especially if you're coming from one of the other frameworks. But I would say it's like the ecosystem is a key part, the experience in your team, what kind of to pick. And yeah, so I would say for me, it's kind of like, I mean, Ark UI is really cool because it kind of like is built on Zag.js. So it's kind of like is a bit independent from like the JavaScript frameworks that are built on top. And this kind of enables a lot of like smaller JavaScript frameworks to, well, just use and, well, kind of like make use of the Ark UI or Zag.js ecosystem, and kind of like, even like if you just have Solid, which is not really, well, not really day pickers for Solid, let's say it that way. But now since they're like, is Ark and Zag, which is kind of like just built on DOM and TypeScript, and they just getting a new framework in. Like, I think you just like yesterday you just released Preact as a package, so just like that's there now, and that's pretty cool. Man, it enables a lot of cool things. But yeah, I think picking a JavaScript framework is like, it's really dependent on like a lot of other factors than just personal preference.
Oh, I see. Totally. That makes sense. I mean, I think, of course, if you have the choice, definitely picking a headless library that gives you the option to actually
Sure, that's
switch
true. That's true.
between these frameworks, it definitely helps a lot. Because I know, like, in some instances, you might want to build a simple page or even a Chrome extension, for example. I mean, would you rather use like React, or would you use Preact, for example? I mean, because Preact is somewhat lighter, I'll definitely go with like Preact for that simple extension. I
Yeah.
don't want to bring in React and React DOM just because I want to do this small extension in that sense. And I think I see people do the same for like Figma plugins as well. If you want to build a Figma plugin, it's just a small iframe window. You don't want to stuff with all your React DOMs. You probably need something lightweight in that sense, right? So
Yeah.
that makes sense. So I think that now we go smoothly into the topic of like, I mean, Ark UI. I mean, if I play the devil's advocate a little bit, it's kind of like, why should I use a library like Ark UI It's great that you've got like different frameworks that I can use it in. So how does that compare to if I actually use a library that is React specific or Vue specific in that sense?
Yeah, I think like there are no real benefits in that regard. I think it can come a benefit later. Let's say right now you just use React and your company uses React, and that's that, right? But later you may end up in a spot where you want to use Vue or have to use Vue or Solid because well you change companies or you have a side project or whatever it is, right? And the way that Ark UI is designed is we're trying to keep the frameworks as close as possible. I mean, from the props. I mean, obviously there are framework-specific differences, like a V model in Vue is not there in React. I mean, that's nothing we can do about, right? But we don't want to like take away V model from Vue, folks. So that makes no sense. So I think it could be a favor later, a benefit than when you switch frameworks because all the parts, all the anatomy, all the designs is already built for your React project or React company ecosystem. You can just leverage on that and kind of like do it again, but for Solid, and you don't have to learn the underlying headless component library once again, right? It's already been there. I think that's like one way it could be a benefit, but if you do React and you only do React, well, that's also fine, right? There's not a big thing about it. I think like what React has, I haven't counted, but I think Ark UI has, I think, a lot of components, maybe not even the most components for headless component library. But yeah, I don't want to say anything wrong. So I haven't checked. But I think a 45 to 50, and I think we have like 5 or 6 in the pipeline that I haven't even like implemented. So yeah, we're looking at like 50 components, and that's pretty cool, right? Because you can just make sure, well, whatever you do and you have to do later, it's most likely there. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Even like the angle slider that was been added recently, which is super unique and super awesome, but like very specific, I would say. But yeah, it's still a thing, and yeah, that's why I love Ark UI and the sheer amount of components. And yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. So playing along in my devil's advocate cap now, of course, Ark UI sounds great. Like I hear all this cool stuff you're talking about. Like, how would that compare to something, say, like Redux UI, which is also quite popular and probably even has more downloads and usage compared to Ark UI?
Yeah, I think Redux UI is also pretty cool. It's a very popular headless component library. I think there's not a big difference between those two. I think Ark UI has a bit more components, I would say, and so it's a bit more richer in the component scope. But other than that, it's also a good fit, and you can definitely use it. What I would say is like what I think Ark UI has an edge in terms of like the fundamental design is like the way like stacking and Z-index work in Ark compared to Redux. I think we really looked into this before we even started out like this whole project, because like this is one of the key things people have issues with, like disclosure components, nesting, and this kind of stuff. So I would say there we definitely have an edge. As I checked, like I used Redux in my old company, and kind of like had the issue with Z-index and skimmed the issue repo there, and there are a couple of issues as well. So yeah, that's something I would say there's a bit of a benefit. But yeah, I think they're both pretty good, and it's very like top tier headless component libraries.
Awesome. All right, cool. So, one other question I think about is like when you work on Ark UI, like what does that look like? Because of course, if I go to the report today, I see like this guy called Chris has like quite a ton of commits in Ark UI. So, like what kind of things do you do when you actually work on Ark UI?
Well, nowadays it's, I guess, just integrating a couple of components coming from Zach, which is it's a process in its own. And then right now, like working a bit on Svelte integration. So Svelte is like an upcoming supported framework that is pretty unique in the way it works as a compiler framework. But yeah, so that's like ongoing. And there's like other stuff like just like creating components and then just like docs right now at this point in stage. So right now, I think we have all major frameworks right now at version 4. So like a lot of iterations already been there, a lot of lessons learned during the way. But yeah, I would say right now it's like in a light maintenance and light development modes, like we do a bit of both. But yeah, it's a pretty cool project. And right now I think the focus is adding a few more components that are already available and bringing support for Svelte and docs updates as well. That's like the holy three, right?
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, to everyone watching, if you've got questions for Chris, please throw it at him or just send it to him straight up, instead of having him answer questions about like Headless. I mean, of course, I can definitely share my thoughts as well. I think right now we can definitely take it into the segment of you actually showing us Ark UI, and like why. I mean, just if you had to do like a quick pitch on like Ark UI to show people around, why they should definitely maybe consider picking Ark UI as their headless library to build their design systems or their apps. Like, I mean, let's have a quick crisp pitch, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's basically, as I said, it's like it comes down to the number of the flexibility that Ark UI gives you in the sense of, well, you can use any of those frameworks that are supported. I would say React, Solid, and Vue are fully supported right at this point. Svelte is ongoing, so we just released version 0.3 today with a couple more components, and there's a lot of components to be implemented, but it's still working. And if you love Svelte, then please go ahead, try it and use it and give us feedback. We're happy to leverage on that and continue. I would say, like, for me, the key highlight is number of components is unmatched in my opinion. It's really good. And the way it kind of is set up. So I'm not sure if you share my screen right now. But
yeah, you can share your screen.
Yeah, we can just do that. I think the landing page for Ark UI is pretty self-explanatory and kind of like, well, just is the page in its own. So as you can see here, we have zero styling. So basically, there's no styling besides some, well, just CSS variables you can leverage and stuff. But if you use an Ark UI component, just render it in Storybook or in any kind of application framework, it will be looking maybe boring. And then you have to bring your own CSS solution, whatever you prefer nowadays. It's composable. You can just match and mix different machines or different components together. Accessibility is baked in. We have a whole test suite just running accessibility issues and checking for accessibility issues. And I think one of the key things, which is very specific and no one really cares about, but it kind of, in some way it does, people care about, is like it's state machine powered. And it's really a thing because, like, if you model a state machine, and I think we did this exercise like once or twice in the last year, and when we kind of like made the right model and just hit the run button, it just worked. And that was astonishing. Like, it's like if you model the state machine correctly, there's a high chance you're just like ready to go. And those kind of weird bugs, like, I don't know, like race conditions kind of stuff, it's very unlikely to happen. And to be honest, most issues I fixed with you together are mostly related about, like, well, the machine was not modeled quite correct or complete, but not really like bugs in that sense of like missing something or a wrong condition or something. And then for me, I think, like, as you can see here, we picked up the slider component as a reference, a control slider. And we can click here and skim through the different implementation, how they differ. It's kind of fun though. Things like React and Solid. We can always create signal and use data. They're kind of similar. And then Vue obviously is a bit different the way it works, and because it's a different idea of the SFC view, but it's still the same, right? So here we have vModel and that kind of stuff. And it's also pretty awesome in its different way, obviously. I mean, we have also like a lot of people using it. I mean, first and foremost, like Jacker UI, the very popular React UI component, well, just using Ark UI under the hood version 3. So that's basically, that. And then a couple of other projects and UI component libraries that I make use of that. And yeah, I mean, that's for me basically the main takeaway. And then we have a lot of docs. And I mean, obviously docs can always be better. But yeah, I mean, if I have the option to like spend a day on docs or adding a new component, most likely going to take a new component. But yeah, I mean, you can just look for yourself. We have like at least one clickable component that's styled, and you can play around with it. We kind of start to, well, I think this is a key portion of any component. It's like the anatomy of a component. And it's very well documented, so we really can get an idea how this looks, and then we can basically find different code examples for different things. There are a couple of components. I mean, don't go any of them. I think one of the cool things and one of the key features I would consider is the environment. As a kind of like, normally when you find a headless component or a headless component kit, it's typically directly accessing the DOM or the window object. And this is fine for 90% of the cases. But if you're starting to run something in an iframe or in a Chrome extension or in, let's say, something else like Figma, I think even there, you can get some problems. And so Ark UI, for example, has that baked in. So, well, we will use the default DOM if you don't provide anything else, right? But if you do provide something else, we want to pick that up. We'll make sure that when you run in an iframe, we basically consider this as our target DOM and not just the parent DOM, which is quite unique and quite cool, to be honest, and very underrated as a feature. But if you ever run this problem, Electron container, this kind of stuff, you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, that's one of the highlights, I would say, the unsung heroes of the Ark UI component library.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. If you were to pick like one component that you'd say like one of your maybe like your best component you've used so far from Ark UI, what would that be?
The best component, it's not that. Even though the environment is pretty awesome, and it's more like I think for me it's date picker. I think date picker are one of the most complex components out there, and also, I mean, color picker is also very complex in that sense, but date picker are more used than color pickers, in my opinion. And a good date picker is really hard. And I mean, I think like we could make like 4 or 5, 6 document pages on like what's possible with a date picker. And it's really like, you can do like so much time and documenting the different options you have with a date picker. But the fact that this is all, well, this is what I meant like in the beginning, like all the parts are accessible and you can just like go in here, and it looks scary, don't get me wrong. But if you can see the pattern, how it works, it's not as scary. And you can basically with that create your completely own date picker. It could be whatever you want. There's no limitation. You can design and code it as you want. And I think this be unmatched as alternatives. I think there's some alternatives to a date picker, but most of them, well, it's just very limited what you can do and change. But yeah, that's what I think is the best component in that sense, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have one question from Esther, asking like, I mean, what was the challenge in getting Ark UI to work across multiple frameworks?
Yeah. So I've been in Dubai, I think 3 years ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
and there was one guy saying, yeah, we do a bit of context, and then tick, and we're done. And well, it's that, but I mean, it was a bit more than that. I think for me, it's like super exciting to work with the different frameworks and kind of see how the frameworks solve the same problem in different ways, right? So you know what to do, right? You have to bring up the same thing from React, and normally you're coming as a React developer as the most popular JavaScript framework, and then you have to bring it to different frameworks and learn how the frameworks do things and how you can leverage their underlying system to your benefit, and then kind of like get it done. And yeah, learning this and kind of like seeing the differences between the different frameworks is pretty cool, but also very challenging, as you kind of like always at some point will hit a bottleneck or hit a roadblock, and you cannot do that in this framework in that way. And then you have to, make compromise, right? And that's like, I think was the hardest challenge. But to be honest, it was more fun than it was a challenge, as it's really cool to see that, like how V model works and how Solid works with the signals and stuff. So it's really cool. But yeah, it was really challenging. But luckily, with like the rise of the AI, we can have some semi-automatic like conversion from one framework to another. And I just have to basically now just go into the other framework. I will code it in React and then run a script that just use AI to basically guess how a solid version looks like. There's some instruction there. And then just like polish it. And so the effort of maintaining a different framework is actually not that high. But yeah, still, you have to figure out the basics and the groundwork, like with Svelte we did last year. And then when you have that, then actually it's just a matter of doing it. And
yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree. Like the main challenge is like learning the frameworks. I think, of course, you could use AI to automate that, but how do you know it's correct? How do you know like there's no bugs, or when someone reports a bug that, hey, Ark UI is cool, but in Svelte, there's just this problem that I'm running into, and like, okay, how do I help this person? Because I don't know too much of Svelte. So you have to go read the docs or like, I don't know, figure it out. But I think the challenge there is kind of like just growing your own knowledge across multiple frameworks, right? So you become a slightly different developer when you know all these frameworks. Like the way your brain thinks is kind of like, it just changes. I mean, because everything is pretty much the same. I mean, most of the things are pretty much repeated across all the frameworks. So you can pretty much translate some ideas like context, like refs, like state, like effects. You can pretty much like translate them across multiple frameworks, and I think that just makes you like pretty skilled. And that's what we've experienced, at least working on Ark UI and Zach.js. But yeah, it's definitely challenging to do because learning only React is hard enough. But I think like just going beyond that and sort of learning those things, I mean, helps us, of course, maintain that much better.
Yeah, you're getting really used to those doc pages for different frameworks, and they're actually pretty good nowadays. Like I think Dan did
Yeah.
an awesome job with like direct docs they released, and I think and the solid docs, the new ones, also pretty epic, and the new svelte docs. I mean, really, like docs getting really good nowadays. I kind of like started to code where docs were kind of like a manual page, like with really no styling at all. So yeah, seeing lately how docs page evolve, it's pretty cool to see, and yeah, they all do a very good job.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got one interesting question. Probably will be like our last one. If anyone else has questions, feel free to drop it. I can take one more after this. Otherwise, that's sort of like the end of it. So we've got here a question. It says, can you explain the relationship between Chakra UI, Ark UI, Panda, Park UI, and all this stuff you guys are working on? Like, if someone is creating an app, like, does it make sense to use them all? Or when do I use which in that sense?
Yeah, that's really a good question, and I think the answer is actually astonishingly simple. So at least part of it. So Zach.js, I would say, is the foundation for headless component library. It's kind of using just the DOM and TypeScript and state machines to just get it done, right? And Zach.js and Zach.js code has like a very specific look and feel. It's like can zoom in a bit more. It looks something like this, where you kind of like get some sort of a hook, and then you just spread the props, and that's fine and works pretty well. But it's not something that you as a React developer are used to see, right? But that's okay, right? That's the way Zach.js works, and this gives also a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom in doing things. And Ark UI basically lives on top of that. It's just kind of like it's kind of the same component, but now it's the machine is kind of part of the context, and now you don't have to worry about all of this spreading, and you can focus on building your app. I think that's what Ark is compared to Zach, right? So that's kind of like the brain pillar, right? And then there's the design pillar. Design pillars are basically just like things that make it beautiful, right? I think Panda is just a CSS framework, right? Like Tailwind is like maybe Bootstrap even counts as well, or SCSS. It's just or Vanilla.js. There are a couple of like CSS frameworks out there, and Panda is one of them. It has their pro and cons, like every JSS framework has, and it's just a CSS framework in that sense, right? And so that's that, right? And then we have like Park. Now, Park UI is something I actually created just for the docs. So we wanted to basically, at the time we created the docs for Ark UI, we wanted to dog food our own CSS solution, which at the time was Panda CSS. And then we kind of like said, well, let's do that. And then that's the name coming from Panda and Ark. It's Park. And that's basically nice. Ark UI and Panda. That's Park UI, right? And kind of the components that are created there are kind of like used in the docs here, and well, everything you find there is also here, right? So that's Park UI, right? And then we have like Chakra, and Chakra now, and since version 3, well, use Ark UI under the hood as the motor, like the engine, and using not Panda, but using Emotion as it was like version 1 and 2. And the reason that's the reason we still use Emotion has to do with a lot of migration and the way, well, dynamic properties are evaluated in Panda and in Emotion. And that's not so easy to migrate if you have an app, and also not easy to spot any issues, right? So that's why we decided to use Emotion still. But yeah, so Chakra right now is Ark and Emotion. Park is Ark and Panda CSS. Well, and Ark and Zach are just on their own, right? They're just like the engine itself, right? There's nothing to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if someone is building an app today, like what should they use? Like, I mean, can you help them make a decision on like what to use?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say kind of depends where you start from, right? If you want to do a hobby project and you want to have a ready to go solution you don't want to tinker with all those kind of headless parts. You just want to use a slider or a carousel. We don't need any tinkering, then I say jQuery UI or Park UI are both fine. I think jQuery UI obviously has a bit more more manpower and a bigger community. So that's definitely always a good choice. Well, if performance is very important to you, since you're using emotion, it has a slightly penalty, which is totally ignorable for any kind of like application you build, because like, well, it's not like any kind of like marketplace or e-commerce store. But if you really want to use something that's very optimized for performance, then Panda is definitely better as emotion in that sense. Not in every aspect, obviously, but in that at least it's really good, since it comes with zero runtime penalty. But also has then some other things you need to consider. But that's also fine. So if you want to use Panda, or you love Panda, and you want to use Ark, well, then you just start from there. Or you want to maybe just look at what someone else has built. And Park is also pretty fine. You can take that as the starting point and then go from there, right? So I think the industry in general is kind of moving into this idea of like, you have a headless component portion, and then you have some sort of like CSS framework. And I think Shane has started this whole thing. And since then, I think a lot of people like the concept, as it kind of like addressed a lot of pain points in the past, but like not being able to alter a certain component and this kind of stuff. And yeah, so I think that's kind of the future, like headless plus some sort of framework, and whatever you like, whatever you feel like is good, and just take that, I would say. Yeah, that's just my take.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, totally. I don't have like so much to add to that, to be honest. But of course, you cannot use them all. Like, I mean, the same project. Yeah, you definitely have to just pick like the stack you prefer. Chakra UI is definitely like one where you just install and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's definitely true. And maybe one word around this. So let's say you're using Redux for historical reasons, and that's totally fine. Nothing bad with that. But let's say you want to do something that Redux doesn't have. I think Daypicker has nothing what they support, at least that I'm aware of. You can still use Redux and then come here, and then you just basically want to just pick this one, which is just kind of scoped to the Daypicker. So the bundle size added using this kind of like import is just basically as if there would be just a dedicated Ark UI reg Daypicker package. So if you want to mix and match, that's totally fine. Like we don't have dedicated package like Redux has, which is also an idea. We kind of stick with this approach, but you can still use Redux and just pick a Daypicker from Ark, and that's not a big penalty in terms of like bundle size. So yeah, so feel free to do that. You don't need to just rewrite your whole app just because you need one component from Ark, so that's not really needed. But if you're ever in that spot, now you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that sort of encourages, like, I mean, you don't have to do like one or the other. You can sort of like, I mean, fluidly mix between them as your application needs grows, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing that we actually also pay attention to, that this is possible, and you're just like, now we have a bundle size, it's a megabyte. That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, true. Awesome. So our final question, I mean, just to prep your mind, it sounds like a classic like technical interview question. So suit up and let's. So it says, this is actually from Invika. So it says like, hi Chris, have you explored how React use transition hook works with state machines? For example, have you used it with a combo box to prioritize input updates while filtering a large list during heavy rendering?
Oh boy. I'm not sure if I have done that. So what I've done in the past is we have like a combo box that has, or was it combo box or select with like some sort of, there we go, visualize select. So where you kind of like can do this kind of stuff, a lot of things. But yeah, the thing is basically for me, as I kind of like stick to that since forever, I would say, if something isn't really laggy or slow or kind of behaves like, well, not good, then I don't care, right? I don't want to optimize performance without like having the problem of performance, right? And then in that spot of maintaining Ark UI, well, I don't really in that spot, since I basically can pick the data points as I need. But for a real life application, I think there's definitely a different story. And I definitely would argument and say that when you have a performance issue and you notice a performance issue because your page is slow and sluggy and it doesn't work really well, then definitely you have to check out and look for certain optimizations. But if you don't really feel any of that, I will definitely say don't do anything, right? I think I think I even saw some blog articles about using Memo and the kind of idea that comparing previous and current props actually adding more penalty than it kind of helps. So yeah, I would say in general, just optimize if you really have to, and if you see the performance issue. But if you don't, well, I would say don't do it. And to answer the question, no, I don't really go into that kind of details. The only thing I do is basically like CSS animations and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I can speak for Eric. I'll say, no, you don't have the job, you're fired.
Yeah, that's okay. I can live with that.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining today. It was really, I mean, good to talk about headless libraries and Ark UI. I mean, I hope you guys definitely consider Ark UI when you're building your projects. I mean, whether you've got like, I mean, an ongoing project or a new project, I mean, Ark UI definitely it's one of the best choices out there. I mean, today I could even say like it's probably the best thing to use. I mean, because it's always growing, always evolving, and because of the way it's built, it's built with longevity and consistency and like multiple frameworks in mind, which I would say in 2025 is one of the best ways to build a library.
I fully agree.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. See you guys in the next one.